grooming gangs that you are now reading about in the mainstream media, I feel compelled to compound on the subject matter, just to highlight the hypocrisy and just how underhand the mainstream media are, and that they're not to be used as a form of truth or any kind of information bureau, because they are the enemy. They are the enemy and they're cowards, and I'm going to try and explain the best I can in this video that relates to the Telford grooming gang scandal, despicable display of perversion that's been going on for years and years and years and years and years. Now, there's a man that we're not allowed to mention because he's public enemy number one, according to the government and these social media platforms. And you may say, stand up to it and say his name. If I do that, my final platform, which is what we're on now, will be removed. And that'll be me gone forever. So you can connect the dots. You can find this individual on a social media platform called Getter. I'm on there only as a spectator, just to watch what's going on. Now, what the mainstream media are currently reporting on at the moment, the man we're not allowed to mention has been covering this story, investigating this scandal, reporting on it, dropping on people's doorsteps, going into people's businesses, putting a microphone in their face, making documentaries, numerous documentaries on this Telford grooming gang despicable scandal since last year. He's so ahead of the mainstream media, it's a joke. And he has protesters going to demonstrations that he actually has in Telford. He actually has these demonstrations in the town where the perpetrators live. Now, you know what the term grooming gang means, don't you? You understand the severity of what grooming gangs do to young British children. And you know what grooming gangs predominantly consist of. And you also know the common denominator, which is their ideology. So you'll notice I'm using words carefully, because if any other Joe Public was to report on what the mainstream media are reporting on now, that these grooming gangs and their common denominator and where they're all initially from, their roots, their heritage, we'd all be branded racists, and we'd probably have the police knock on our door. Now, if you jump over to that platform I just mentioned, Getter, download it in the App Store, boom, follow the man that we're not allowed to mention. If you go and look at the documentaries that have already been made, you can connect the dots yourself. You can go back in time and you can see when the first documentary was produced and aired. And you can see how long that documentary took to make. So you can do the maths, you can work out the timeline, and you can see that this has been investigated and exposed for a long time by somebody we can't mention. And the mainstream media are now jumping on the back of it because it's blown up so big. And the man that we're not allowed to mention is getting no credit for it whatsoever. In fact, what they'll do is next week they'll find something that they can chastise and lambast him for. That's what they'll do. They'll pick faults in his personality, in his private life, or anything they can do to denounce him, and they'll highlight on that. What they won't do is say, bravo, you actually confronted each and every member that you could find of these grooming gangs individually and in their numbers, in their masses, on their own turf, in their own businesses, on their own front doorstep. Well done. You put yourself in grave danger to expose these monsters that walk amongst us, that from top to bottom, political, council, senior ranking police have all swept under the carpet because they were all too scared to be branded as racist, because the grooming gangs aren't white Caucasian males. If you're a criminal, you're a criminal, irrespective of the colour of your skin. And things like this, of this magnitude, they just need to be squashed immediately without the fear of any repercussion or branding. They're just words. Someone brands you, whatever. Who cares? You commit a crime, you got to do the time. I don't care the colour of your skin, I don't care who you pray to. But if you do things like groom children to the point where you can then exploit them sexually and pass them around amongst your friends and your cousins, ply them with drink and drugs, make them even more vulnerable than they already are, then you can go to jail. You can go to jail for a long time. And I'm going to print your despicable face in every single newspaper in the country, front page, so the rest of the world knows you're a monster. But the mainstream media, they just don't seem to want to do that. And consequently, we now have mentally disturbed adults now that were abused as children because nobody wanted to speak up about it. So I just want to highlight who deserves the credit for this expose. It's not the Daily Mail, it's not the Guardian, it's not the Independent, it's not any of those rags, any of those cowardice rags, none of those journalists that have put their name to it. Go and look on Getter, have a look at the man's work that we're not allowed to mention, and then you will see who is responsible for exposing and hounding these monsters. And that's what they are, they're monsters. Sexual, predatory monsters, despicable human beings. The worst kind of human being that you could possibly imagine. And take note of the documentaries as well. You're not just reading stories from some scrawny little journalist in a back dark office on his keyboard. This is someone that has been on the front line, needed teams of security to support him because these gangs were setting fire to vehicles of victims that were speaking out, trying to intimidate them further. You'll see that security teams were put in place in the houses of some of these victims because the perpetrators were going to the doorstep, to their house, to their road to intimidate them, to remain silent so they weren't exposed. You'll see the lengths that the man has gone to and is continuing to go to expose these monsters. And by exposing these monsters, it keeps your children safe from these monsters. Because if these monsters know that they can now potentially be exposed, because there is certain people out there that don't care what they get branded for exposing you, maybe they'll think twice before sexually abusing and drugging your children. And some of the people that condemn the journalism that he does and some of the views that he has. And bear in mind, this man has been on to grooming gangs for years. For years and years and years. Years back, when he was branded all sorts of things, a racist by Piers Morgan, boom. 10 years later, Piers Morgan is talking about the same topic. No one brands him anything. It's okay if Piers says it, because he decides. All hypocritical woke wallies that are putting our children in grave danger, severe jeopardy. It affects their mental health for the rest of their life. You don't just get groomed and passed around and sexually exploited and then get to a certain age, you think, oh, I can walk away from that now. It's in the past. That shit stays with you forever and ever and ever. Very, 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 very cowardice. A very cowardice country we live in, where we have the top echelon of society are too afraid to call out gangs of men that groom and rape because of the colour of their skin and their religion. How outrageous. I would expect any other grooming gang, no matter where they were from in the world, no matter how pale they were, I would expect them to be lambasted, put in front of a judge, published across every social media platform, every newspaper you can imagine, sentenced to life in jail, never to return, and shamed. I'd expect that, no matter who the perpetrator. But we don't do that over here. We don't look after our own. We allow guests to take grotesque liberties with children out of fear of offending the guests. Wow. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. Take it on board. Think things through before you speak, before you come back with some kind of opposing nonsense. Stick to the topic. Appreciate the work that's been done by the man we can't mention. Take a breather. Have a day off. Highlighting other things that you think that he's done in the comments. We're not talking about anything other than the protection of children, because you'll notice the common theme. Who the grooming gangs target: young, white, British children, young girls. You'll notice the theme. So there's a problem. There's a monumental problem and a fundamental flaw in the whole system of the country. We are very, very cowardice. We are scared. We're a feared nation, or should I say, we're a fearing nation. We need to grow a pair of stones, and we need to perform a hell of a lot better. And number one priority is protect the children. Wow. So yeah, get her, download it. I felt compelled to put this video out there. It's important that the correct people get the correct credit for the work that they've done and the danger that they've put themselves in. I can't think of anything else other to say, because it would be very impolite and it would get me removed from this platform yet again. And this is my last account. Stand up to these cowards. Don't think for 1 second the mainstream media are your friend. They're not. They're the enemy. Cowards. Spineless. And by being spineless and cowardice, all they're doing are putting your children in grave danger.